mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans for justice. The people's champion, champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, the people demand. Right to life and security. Oh, what a touch, oh, what a job. Oh, what a peace. How great this country could be. Respecting your rights, respecting human rights. What a wonderful nation this could be. Out of many we are one in a Jamaica. Make it a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities. No to unlawful detention and police brutalization. Class, gender, race or religion. We not tolerate discrimination. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Justice, justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, the people demand. Right to life and security. Oh, what a job. Oh, what a
Happy Monday.
So great this country
To our listeners
could
and those who are joining us via the YouTube platform. Happy to be here with you as always. My name is Michael Jackson, Executive Director of JFJ.
I'm Jade Williams, Policy Research and Advocacy Specialist at JFJ.
Now, viewers, you realize that Jade is back with us this week. She has returned from her work vacation, and I say that because apparently she has been vacationing with police officers each week. So we're happy to have her joining us. Jade, welcome back.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here this week.
And by the way, news commentator, she highlighted that she misses you in particular. So I'm just flagging that so that the YouTubers can put up some resistance as to why only news commentator Jade is missing. All right, so let's start a little riot online. All right, so today we're going to be discussing access to information for persons living with disabilities. And we will be joined by Anthony Aiken, and we know Antoinette, sorry. And we know Antoinette as what I would say one of the more prolific individuals when it comes to advocating for the rights of people living with disabilities. And we see her all the time on PBC when you have these national events happening. So we're certainly honored to have her joining us. And we're going to be joined by Travis Banks, who is the legal officer for Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities. So that is the topic for this week, and we will start in a bit. Jade, over to you in terms of the rights of the week and so on.
All right, so our right of the week this week comes from our Disabilities Act, Part 4, which speaks to freedom from discrimination under sections 24 and 25. It says a person with disability shall be entitled to enjoy the privileges, interests, benefits, and treatment, whether through contractual licensing or other arrangements, and that person shall not by any reason of such disability be subject to any form of discrimination. So while it may not be in the Constitution, we do have our Disabilities Act that speaks to freedom from discrimination on the basis of disabilities. And then we also have our trivia question for the week, which is which year was the Disabilities Act first passed? So we know it came into force in 2022. Which year was it first passed? So you can respond by sending a WhatsApp to 876-239-7583 or send a message to us on Instagram or a message in the YouTube chat on YouTube. Yes.
All right. Before we get into today's topic, the week that was, which we won't have enough time to go through, but I think we need another show dedicated to this particular topic. Again, matter of sentencing. So I think many Jamaicans We perhaps celebrated with the family following the Noel Maitland sentencing. And we saw where the individual was sentenced to life imprisonment following all the facts that were heard in the court proceedings. And he's expected to serve 32 years before he becomes eligible for parole. And I saw some comments on social media about this and comparisons being made to the Julian Silveira matter. And people are claiming injustices and so on, and the matters were closed and because of who was involved. And I think it's important very quickly to indicate that the individuals were sentenced for two different offenses. One was manslaughter and the other was murder. And Jade, I think maybe next week we need to have another topic on explaining the difference between murder and manslaughter, explaining again the factors that go into sentencing. And as I said last week, I was quite heartened to hear Chief Justice Brian Sykes going through that 2-hour explanation of the factors that went into the sentencing for Julian Silveira, and the judge in the Noel Maitland case doing a similar exercise, if you will, where the public could understand the mitigating and aggravating factors. But, I think another show on this is important to be had as we continue to educate through the Let's Start Justice program. So barring any new issue emerging, I think next week we should do another show specifically on murder and manslaughter and the issue of sentencing.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think that's necessary as well.
Yeah.
Because some people are not accepting the fundamental difference between the two offenses, much less why the sentences would be different. So,
Yeah. All right, so we have both our guests on, Antoinette Aiken, sign language interpreter, and Mr. Travis Ebanks. Jade, I will defer to you to lead because you left me by my lonesome for a few weeks.
what if I'm a little rusty?
I'm sure that's not the case.
All right, well, thank you both for joining us. We are discussing the topic of access to information for persons living with disabilities. I will start with you, Mr. Ebanks. When we talk about access to information for persons living with disabilities, what exactly are we talking about? Like, what are there any gaps? What are we talking about when we say access to information?
Yes, good afternoon, Jade, and good afternoon, Michaela. Thank you very much for having me here. Good afternoon also to your listeners. When we speak about gaps as relates to person with disability, we're talking about their inability to access information and access it in a manner which is in an accessible format, and we're speaking about inclusive communication. We're looking at the design system which are in place that allows persons with disability to access information in a manner which they can comprehend and utilize without the need for any further assistance. And as you mentioned, gaps, there are various gaps that currently exist in our society. And need not to say, I think one of the main one is a lack of sign language interpreters. Also, the limited use of Jamaican Sign Language. And these are, I believe, once we're able to overcome some of these gaps, then we will see a greater appreciation for persons with disability and how they're able to receive information, utilizing those information for their benefit. Not just those, I would say, systemic gaps, but we also have material challenges as relates to the utilization of information by persons with disability. And so oftentimes you would have someone trying to access information, but they're not in a manner which can be utilized. So for example, the limited usage of Braille, large print, audio formats, and also something which we all take for granted is closed caption. And so once we are able to overcome these barriers, you would realize how beneficial this can be for person with disability to make more decision on their own, and which they can utilize information to that level of dependence that they would have on others. You would realize that they're able to overcome that once we're able to go beyond some of these barriers. So I think those are some of the major gaps which currently exist from the perspective of person with disability accessing information.
Thank you for that, Mr. Ebanks. I wanted to bring you in, Antoinette. Mr. Ebanks spoke mostly about structural gaps, and I know that you are an activist as well as a sign language interpreter, an activist within your deaf community. So I wondered if there were any particular issues for the deaf community that you would want to highlight.
Well, I think, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon to your listeners. I think it was pointed out clearly by Mr. Ebanks, but I also know that other than needing sign language interpreters, the biggest thing that the deaf community needs right now is for Jamaican Sign Language to become an official language. I think once that happens, a lot of things will structurally change. You'll find that they will have to start teaching children in school, which will make even a basic conversation simple without an interpreter. For example, a deaf person going to the pharmacist and asking for a Panadol. They'll probably be able to pick up, hey, they're asking for some medication, and if they don't know the sign for Panadol, they'll be able to understand the spelling of Panadol because they were taught in school. So I think the biggest thing the government needs to do right now, the country needs to do, is rally around Jamaican Sign Language becoming an official language. Separate and apart from that, I think the deaf community also needs access to other things more than government or NGO stuff, for example. They need access to leisure. Our movie theaters are not accessible. Our entertainment spaces are not accessible. They need entertainment as well. They're humans. And if you are to compare Jamaica to other parts of the world, you realize that they provide access to their deaf communities, while the Caribbean has yet to do that when it comes to entertainment and leisure. I want to add something that is not necessarily connected to the deaf community, but it's also connected to disability. When you talk about access to information, you also talk about speaking simply. We have persons who have intellectual disabilities, and we tend to forget them as well. When you're making presentations or when you're having a conversation, a lot of Jamaicans love to show their intellect, and I get it. But sometimes we need to remember that not all disabilities are visible, and you have to remember the best way to get across your information to anybody is by just addressing it simply. So those are my 2 points.
Yeah, thanks much. We're upon the break, and when we return, I just want us to have a quick conversation on the broader issue of public participation. So, for example, Travis, Antoinette, we're listening to the budget debates now. It's so important for all of our fundamental aspects of our life. And yes, we have the Access to Information Act, but what about things such as even listening in and participating in the budget debate, how to exercise your right to vote, and so on. So the broader issue of public participation, I would want us to center the conversation a little bit around that. But we'll take the break.
No problem.
From the biggest tracks to the biggest energy, Nationwide keeps it moving. If you love the vibes, come and lock in with us for real.
World boss, leave a prison could stop me.
Join the Nationwide 90 FM Family Club today on Patreon.
Practice. God me say, yo, watch you over me practice.
CFOs and senior decision makers across the Caribbean, this is your moment. The Caribbean CFO Summit goes live March 24 and 25, 2026. 2 days, 13 CPD accredited hours, one powerful virtual gathering of the region's leading finance minds. This is where strategy meets innovation, where restructuring meets execution, where finance leaders prepare for what the next decade demands. Registration closes March 24. Do not sit this one out. Secure your seat now at CaribbeanCFOSummit.com.
Mount Pleasant FA set for one of the greatest comebacks in CONCACAF Champions Cup history. Watch it all unfold Thursday, March 19 at the National Stadium as the full-strength Caribbean champions put it all on the line against the MLS's best, LA Galaxy. Kickoff 6 p.m. Admission $2,000, pre-sold $2,500 at the gate. Students under 19 with ID $1,000. Get your tickets now online at caribtix.com or in-store at Meister Sports Portmore, Wood Gas Station, Draxall and Constant Spring Road. Sponsored by the Jamaica Tourist Board, Global Institute of Sports, Sports Development Foundation, Medicare Ambulance Service, Power Aid and Happy Water.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are discussing an important issue of access to information for persons living with disabilities. And we are joined by Travis Banks, Legal Officer of the Jamaica Council for Persons with Disabilities, Antoinette Aiken, Advocate and Sign Language Interpreter. Antoinette, I want to ask you this question before segueing to Travis. When we talk about the Access to Information Act, we know we have the legal framework where people can get information from the government and state bodies. You can ask for a report. You can ask for status of expenditure. But one of the critical things that we've advocated for is the importance of the government and the state agencies sharing information before people have to request it, putting the things on the website and so on. So I just wanted to appreciate just generally how people with disabilities navigate, public participation generally, attending the town hall sessions, the different fora, paying attention to the budget debates that are happening and so on. What are some of the issues there so that they can understand, the politics, the social implications and so on? If you could just walk us through that. What does public participation mean and the barriers there?
Well, I can speak on behalf of the deaf community. I know for public participation, especially politics, etc., government, even access to the Access to Information website, I know that it's particularly difficult for them to navigate, and that's because of years of neglect. The government and other stakeholders have been ensuring that they provide access with sign language interpreting, but that's not the only way to provide access to the deaf community. So, for example, we have our website. I know for people who are blind, if once the website is accessible where they can access it via the JAWS or whatever audio mechanism that they use, for a deaf person, it's difficult because a lot of us don't realize that English is not a deaf person's first language. So when they are trying to access information, when they're reading it, it might come across, it might mean something different than what it actually means to them, what it actually means. So they might read something and that's not the literal meaning of it because they're not understanding because it's not their first language. So to actually provide true access to the deaf community when it comes to access to information, everything has to be in their first language, which is Jamaican Sign Language. So we're right back at that. So for them to access certain details and certain information, a lot of times they would have to, if they do access the Access to Information website, they're going to sit down, they're going to discuss it, and they're going to try and pull apart what is being said. And they can't, it's individually. Sometimes they have to do it in groups because it makes it easier to understand what the English is, what is being said. So for Jamaican Sign Language, that's really what they need to get true access. they need access via their native language, which is Jamaican Sign Language, and access in a way that is native to them, which is Jamaican Sign Language. And I keep saying that because it's really the only way. Adding closed caption is great, and that's good for people who get deaf when they're older, but it's not great for somebody who was born deaf or grew up deaf, because English is not their first language.
You know, I wanted to just quickly follow up on that question in terms of how we would integrate that. Would that be to have a video of a person signing, or would it be that we graphically put the signs there? How would we implement that practically?
Correct. So a couple years ago, eLearning Jamaica, they did some videos for CXC. They did woodwork, they did biology, they did a curriculum, and what they did is convert all of the curriculum into Jamaican Sign Language, so it would become accessible for deaf students to understand what was being said. So that is what you'd have to do. So for example, you go on a website, you navigate. It's not something that we see often. But you can have a space where deaf people can access the information, maybe an email address where they can email, and the information can be shared to them in a more accessible way, which is in their native language, Jamaican Sign Language. It's just what it is, and it's like that right across the world. Once you're deaf and you're born deaf, whatever spoken language is spoken in your country, it's not your native language. You're not going to be able to understand it completely. It's a second language to you, and we all know what a second language is like.
Thanks much. Travis, to you. I have a question here in the YouTube chat. And the question is speaking to what is the benchmark internationally? What obtains there that perhaps Jamaica should seek to scale up or to strengthen? What are the best practices?
Indeed. I think what, and Tony has just indicated, I think that's the first and foremost, the formal recognition of Jamaican Sign Language, and making sign language interpretation for public broadcast and government broadcast mandatory. And I think once we have that, it will start to pave the way for the private sector to follow. And believe you me, once these measures, once information are accessible to persons with visual, hearing, and intellectual disability, you have captured it. But along with the recognition of Jamaican Sign Language, another aspect from a digital perspective, because we have been going digital, and that is the way forward. Another aspect is ensuring that there is digital access, and the benchmark for digital accessibility would be the Web Content Accessibility Guideline, which is WCAG, and it ensures right across the board, internationally speaking, it ensures that content that are available online, your television, your website, your mobile devices, that they all have screen reader capabilities, caption, videos, and audio descriptions are provided, and that whatever forms you have, they're accessible online. So you have accessible online forms on portal. And I will give you one example. So for example, the JCPD website is web content accessibility, rather is compatible or is consistent with the Web Content Accessibility Guideline. And so for someone with a disability, you can, when you go on the website, if you can set the different features whereby the wording on the website will literally read to you, and that is what we're calling for. So with the recognition of Jamaican Sign Language, we're also asking, or calling rather, for the strengthening of digital access. And I do believe with the appreciation of both sign language and digital accessibility, you'll have greater appreciation, a wider coverage of information being disseminated, and which is being received by a person with disability. And you'll see how much of a difference that will make towards the community.
Do you think that the digital access is something we will need regulatory support for? Because, you know, in some jurisdictions, particularly in the EU, they have regulations that would speak to what access means in terms of a digital space that must be complied with, otherwise there would be sanctions. Do you think that the approach that we need to be taking?
Absolutely. This is the thing. We have an issue with enforcement in Jamaica. We have an issue with monitoring. And if we do not have strict enforcement, if we don't have strict monitoring, then we'll just have a free-for-all society whereby this might be legislated, but is it really followed? Is it really enforced? And so we would have to have some form of mechanism whereby there's enforcement and there's monitoring. From the get-go, I do know that there is some work by the Bureau of Standards Jamaica to ensure that there is an appreciation for the standard which must be appreciated by the population. And the JCPD, members of our staff who would have sat on the committees, or committee rather, at the BSJ, in the preparation, in the whole provision of those guidelines to ensure that there is standard when it comes on to digital accessibility. So, of course, I would say we're definitely going to need some form of monitoring and enforcement mechanism to ensure that there has to be some standard. It cannot be a free-for-all for everybody. There has to be some standard.
As you were mentioning standards, just from my own appreciation and our viewers as well, clearly, similar to how you have the sexual harassment legislation that spells out and gives a suggested guideline, if you will, of what agencies, including private sector, should undertake. Can you remind me, Travis, if there is such similar guideline in the Disabilities Act?
Well, as you know, the Disabilities Act also has regulation, and a feature of the Disabilities Act and the regulation is for the council to prepare what are called codes of practice. And the codes of practice where it is not fully spelled out in the act and where it is not fully spelled out in the regulation, then there are codes of practice which would guide one. So, for example, I think if my memory serves me correctly, there's supposed to be about 7 codes of practice in totality. So far, a number of them have been achieved. Currently, the one that we're working on is education and training. And so what the codes of practice does is that it spells out in greater details what are the expectations of the population, service providers, what are the expectations of individuals, persons with disability, what they can expect when it comes on to education, and ensuring that the full gamut of the act is spelled out and persons can benefit. So you do have education and training. This is a code of practice which guides education right across the board. Another code of practice that will be drafted shortly, and these are all policies which has to go through the relevant ministries and also cabinet office for sign off to ensure they can be they are appreciated right across the board. But apart from education and training, you also have healthcare, you do have accessibility. And so these are codes of practice which are meant to ensure that there's greater understanding of what is expected of both individuals with disability as well as service providers from the perspective of government, from the perspective of the private institution. And so you can understand where I'm going with this.
Yes. Thank you for that, Mr. Ebanks. I wanted to quickly jump back to Tony as you were talking about standardization. I recall that Jamaican Sign Language, it might differ in terms of, urban and rural areas, different communities. In terms of making it an official language, how would we standardize to ensure that all persons or all types of Jamaican Sign Language would be adequately represented, or is there already a standard that we can integrate?
Well, you're correct.
So let's just take a break and then you pick up when we return, please.
Okay.
Morning After after morning, you've made Nationwide 90 FM part of your routine. So let's take this connection one step closer. Join the Nationwide 90 FM Family Club and be part of it officially on Patreon.
Family.
Montego Bay, get ready! This Wednesday, March 18, the JUTC Rural Bus Campaign promotion rolls into Sam Sharp Square. From 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., join us live on air with the E-Zone crew, Honeybee and Kareem, as we bring the excitement straight to you. Discover how JUTC is making travel safer, more reliable, and affordable for rural commuters. Learn about new routes, schedules, and the benefits of choosing JUTC. Come out, be part of the broadcast, share your voice, and enjoy giveaways and surprises. This is your chance to connect directly with JUTC and see how we're bringing dependable transport closer to the people. That's this Wednesday, March 18, Sam Sharp Square, Montego Bay. Don't miss it. JUTC Rural Bus Campaign. Safe, reliable, rural strong.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We've been discussing access to information for persons living with disabilities. We are joined by Travis Banks from JCPD and Antoinette Aiken, sign language interpreter. Before the break, we were talking about Jamaican Sign Language and the possibility of making it an official language and what that would look like in terms of standardization. Antoinette.
So currently we have so I would classify Jamaican Sign Language. I'm not saying it's the same as Patois, but we can do some comparisons. So in Kingston, our Patois might sound a little bit different from people from Montego Bay, correct? So it's pretty much the same with Jamaican Sign Language. The signs are a little bit different, but it's understood. You understand what is being said. The only difference is something that we have in St. Elizabeth called sign, and they used to call it country sign, but there's a push now to just call it sign, and that is based off Patois. It's spelled like how you would spell in Patois, S-A-I-N, sign, right? So in St. Elizabeth, there was a big deaf population there that never attended school, and they developed basically their own sign language. A lot of their signs, however, are in Jamaican Sign Language. So, for example, in sign, they sign yam, and we sign it the same way in Jamaican Sign Language. So in order to standardize that, I think we'd have to put on the record that we actually have two sign languages in Jamaica. We have one that is Jamaican Sign Language and one that is sign. I don't know. The sign itself is basically becoming very indigenous. It's still used, but it's used mainly amongst the older deaf population in St. Elizabeth, because the younger deaf population in St. Elizabeth now would have had access to school. They would have been having access to, for example, me interpreting at Parliament and other events, and just access overall. So you find that they are using Jamaican Sign Language. It doesn't mean that they don't know sign, because they do know it, because they have to communicate with the older ones. But they tend to communicate more in Jamaican Sign Language. So there is a solution, and I think the solution is just to move forward and go ahead with making Jamaican Sign Language official with some form of recognition for the fact that we do have another sign language in the country, which is called sign. That's my solution, because the older population they're there, but the younger population, they have more access, so you find that they're using Jamaican Sign Language more.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tony, because, you know, I've had conversations, for example, with Kimberly of Jamaica Association for the Deaf, and even within the context of the Constitution and the right to know charges in a language that you speak, what exactly does that mean for the deaf community, for example? What is the onus on the state to ensure that, you know, in court proceedings, these things are funded by the state? When you go to report to a police station, you know, because we've had survivors of domestic violence, sexual violence, for example, and there's no interpreter. What exactly does that mean for the state to be in compliance with the Disabilities Act? So I'm happy you raised it, and we're in complete support with the recommendation for sign language to get official status.
Correct. And when it comes to the state, as somebody who has been interpreting for 21 years, I have been in situations where it's not normal, to be honest, for interpreters to be advocates, but because of our climate and our situation for decades, I find myself in a situation where I force the state. I tell them that they have to pay for it. It's not on the focus of the deaf person to pay to make a report. They have to pay for it. So I think sometimes you have to, as a group, as an NGO, or as an advocate, or somebody who just understands the system, you just have to just push for that. Because if I go to the police station, no. If I'm called, no. The first thing I remind them is that you are responsible for this. You are responsible for payment, you are responsible for follow-up, you are responsible for everything. It's not the responsibility of the deaf person. So I do find that the JCF, especially certain departments like Sissoka and certain departments, they do comply, but I'm not sure about the broader JCF, to be honest.
Yes, I'm happy you said that, because they've gotten support and funding, and they've trained a lot of their officers in sign language, and being able to communicate effectively, or as best as possible, based on the resources. Just a question from me to Travis. This matter of funding and cost, and we saw that emerging. I didn't want to pose this to Tony because she was an advocate in this respect. For example, when election was happening, and the matter of the debates and the cost implications arose, in some respect, who pays when it comes to giving people right to information and public participation? Who pays? And should we be cognizant of resource limitations on private sector in some respect? How would you respond to a recommendation as we move to having some elements mandatory, if you will?
There's an expectation that the state has to bear some of these costs, and so costs associated with just the mere provision of basic necessities, which the legislation also calls for. The state has to step up and provide in that regard. We have had a situation with funding for the longest of a while. We understand our economic condition, but the state has an obligation to really step up to the plate and offset these costs. One has to appreciate that these rights, for the most part, are part of our constitutional right. I mean, the disabilities are really and truly just, it's almost as though it is that document which goes into further details of the rights of an individual, a person with disability. But these are all human rights which we have which we have a right to, and so the state is expected to step up and cover some of these costs, or cover the costs rather, so that persons can benefit, participate in our society just as anyone else. But also, one has to be considerate that we are a society, and therefore our moral conscience has to step up. And equally, the private sector, I mean, they benefit from persons with disability as well. We do support their businesses. We do support, we are partakers of the services which they offer. And so, one has to allow their moral compass to really step in and also assist in covering the cost of some of these essential items which make such a big difference for persons with disability. So, whilst it is the greater burden is on the state, one has to appreciate that everybody has, at some point, has to absorb these costs.
As you were talking about the kinds of support that are necessary, and you spoke to items, I know we focused a lot on the deaf community throughout the conversation, but in terms of other persons living with disabilities outside of the deaf community, what kind of support would we want to see improve for them to expand access to information? That's to Mr. Ebanks.
Yes. Well, accessibility. Going to somewhere, going to an entity, because not all the time information which you require will be available online or can be accessed on the internet or television or in the public. And so one at point would have to, one must enter into a facility. And so we're calling for basic necessities such as being able to go around, being able to navigate the street without unencumbered by sidewalks deficit, unencumbered by lack of proper stoplight, which would have signals to know when it is safe to cross, when it is not safe to cross. And whilst I'm there, I think there's only one decent stoplight in Jamaica that has that feature, and that is the one out by halfway tree by the bus stop, whereby there's a speaker which beeps when it is safe to when it is safe to cross and when it is not. And so we're speaking of physical access to facilities where currently the JCPD is undertaking several audits, accessibility audits on government agencies, and we have, well, I don't think we're surprised, but many of our institutions, physically speaking, they are not accessible to persons with disability. And as we continue to conduct our audits, we've been making recommendations, and might I say, some of our recommendations are actually being adopted, and we're seeing changes, but we're asking for a whole mindset. We're asking for do not allow for the JCPD to come and audit your institution, your facility, or your premises rather, for you to do something. We want to access, persons with disability want to access institutions, access public spaces without further assistance, without the need for somebody assisting us. We want to be able to freely enter an institution and access the information that we want, our services, or our services that we want, and that is what we're looking for. So beyond accessibility from the perspective of being able to access information, we're also asking for physical access. We're speaking of accessibility from a physical perspective as well.
Yeah, but before we give Tony the last word to close us out, I'm hoping, Travis, that the Minister with responsibility shares some of those reports. Similar to how we have the Auditor General reports and so on being tabled in Parliament, I think it would be instructive to get a sense of that audit so that, the public can dissect and we can see scorecards and so on across the varying ministries, agencies, and how well we're doing and what the time frame is for the improvement where errors are flagged. Because I don't think it bodes well to have a Disabilities Act and NGOs as well. We need to improve here at JFJ and others in terms of how well we are compliant with the legislation.
So I'll ask Antoinette to give, the final word on this topic.
Well, all I'll say, my advocacy has always been consistent and the same. I just want to see access for deaf people in every sphere of life, whether they decide to go to the hospital or the police station or some fest or carnival. They should have access in every sphere of life, and in order to provide that, you have to make Jamaican Sign Language an official language. And as Mr. Ebanks said, it's not only the government. It comes down to a point where people just have to realize that people access information in different ways, and if you want to be that business or that person or that NGO or that company or that government agency that stands out, then you have to make your information and everything you do accessible in a format that is best suited for whoever needs it. That's my final words. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you both for joining us.
For having us.
Appreciate it.
All right, so we take the break.
Tune in to Cliff Views Online on March 20 from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. as we broadcast from the University of the West Indies for World Water Day. This year's theme, Inclusivity and Equity, highlights the commitment to ensuring that every Jamaican has access to safe, reliable water. Representatives from Jamaica's major water agencies will be present to answer questions, share valuable information, and help you explore the many possibilities within the water industry. So tune in to Cliff Views Online for World Water Day celebration, Inclusivity and Equity. Catch the live stream on our YouTube channel at Nationwide 90 FM Live 2, or keep your station locked to Nationwide 90 FM, the new revolution in media. This broadcast is brought to you by the Ministry of Water, Environment and Climate Change.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We just had a very good conversation on the issue of persons living with disabilities, their ability to access information and participate in public life generally. That includes, for example, some of the governance issues that we all should be paying attention to. And I trust that we are watching PBC and we are paying attention to the budget debate. Before we go into our discussion, my little preaching for 10 seconds. Sometimes we say that we don't participate in politics, but politics will participate for us because everything that is discussed in Parliament impacts our everyday. The budget, it impacts our ability to access health services. So much money is being allocated to the Ministry of Health and Wellness. What is happening at local government. So once the budget debates wrap up, you know that you're going to be moving into your sectoral presentations, and you'll hear from the different cabinet members and then the opposition spokespersons and so on. And I trust we're paying attention. All right, it's important, and let's not, okay, the things then too boring. Sometimes, yes, Parliament will got a little bit too long. We know that. But we need to pay attention to what is happening in Parliament. Manager preaching for a few seconds. Right, Jade?
Yes, I'm in full agreement. I've gotten this lecture and I've heeded.
Yes, I'm the worst person to report to, by the way, because you have to watch news and pay attention in Parliament. Can you work effectively without it? But anyway, so speaking of budget debate, we heard from our first female finance minister, the most honorable Favor Williams. And I just want us to listen to a clip where she opened her speech that she made in Parliament. Can we have that recording played, please?
Because you do not object to the sexual overtures does not mean you give approval. Do not let anyone tell you that silence means consent. Mash down that lie. It is one of those sayings that we are told from childhood days. That phrase, Madam Speaker, silent means consent, is meant to shut us down. It is meant to have us crawl into ourselves and never utter a word about the abuse or the abuser. And so I say to all our Jamaican women, married or unmarried, and to our girls who are suffering in silence, I pray you find your voice. I encourage you to speak out. Your boldness will help to sensitize this Jamaican society and begin the change in the hearts and minds of each person in our society, and I know of which I speak. To all our women and girls, know that this female Minister of Finance and the Public Service is in your corner. And so I say to you, even if no one believes your truth, still speak out.
You know, Jade, you know how sometimes I can be a little bit harsh, I criticize the knocking of the benches, but this was a time that I personally joined the chorus. Miss Dorothy here at the office, sometimes when she hears me knocking the benches, she thinks I'm going crazy in here. But, you know, I stand in support of the comments made by our finance minister. And, you know, we are listening to hear about NIR and how much money will be allocated here, more details on digital tax and all of these things. You know, that you're getting your increased income threshold this month for our April 1. We are listening for those things, but how she opened, I found it very instructive and enlightening, and it was welcoming. There are some things that jumped out at me, but I will defer to you to just share any aspect of her comments that jumped out at you, Jade, as we share with the listeners as well.
Well, you know, I thought it was important that she brought the matter to the fore, even though it was not necessarily her portfolio responsibility to be speaking on this particular matter, but I think it is important for it to have been brought up in the Parliament outside of specific committees that speak to these issues or specific forums that are for those issues, but in the general space where all persons could appreciate what the sentiment was about.
Yeah. You know, for me, I look to my leaders for leadership, and coming from our first and only so far finance minister, who is a very senior cabinet member, it was good. And, you know, there are some aspects that, you know, the public education needs to continue around. Silence does not mean consent. And one of the conversations we've had on this radio show here at JFJ, and when we do community interventions, is the importance of explaining consent to people. Because I do think there's a fundamental misunderstanding. You carry somebody out on a date, and you think because you buy a $5,000 food at some restaurant, it means that automatically there is some yes. When the minister says married or unmarried, that is an important conversation to be had around the issue of marital rape, for example. And that automatically, once there's some ring on your finger, it means that you say yes all the time or indefinitely. These are some of the things, you know, that I found very instructive, and the implications of it, hearing from Minister Favour Williams in this regard. So kudos to her. Yes, JD.
Yes, I was just gonna say one of the things it brought to mind as the list. You and the listeners know I've been out with my police officers for the past couple of weeks, and over that time we would have discussed the matters of gender-based and domestic violence. And, you know, back to your point about understanding of consent, you know, I think even the understanding that consent has to be continuous, you know, that it can stop at any point in the process, and that if you ignore that halt, then you are still at fault. You know, I think even that understanding is difficult, and I think one of the challenges is our cultural perception of these things as well, that allows for some of these provisions to seem popular amongst other members of our society, you know. So I think we also need to be doing a level of public education in terms of, you know, bodily autonomy, in terms of consent, and in terms of kind of cultural reshaping of how we think about our relationships. Because also one of the discussions that we've ended up having in these sessions as we talk about these things is the transactional nature of relationships and how that can manifest from either side, from either party. And so it's definitely important that we contextualize these conversations in that way.
Yeah. You know, I was heartened by the minister, but I do want to come with a challenge, because we, at this moment, I think we have the highest number of female parliamentarians. And in 2023, we know that we established the bicameral caucus of women parliamentarians, and we have some 19 members of parliament, and I think about 7 senators across both political parties in this respect. And I think more needs to be done from our female parliamentarians. More attention needs to be given. We had the Joint Select Committee established for the Domestic Violence Act. You saw where we said that we had written to the minister at the time because the meetings simply were not happening. An election was held in September, and subsequent to that, we had another Joint Select Committee that was reconvened. And we're about to submit our document, I believe, between today and tomorrow, anticipating that we would be invited to make our recommendations to the committee. But some recommendations, have been languishing. We've heard, for example, from the Foreign Minister, Senator Kamina Johnson-Smith, on repealing marital rape. No, that is a simple section in the Sexual Offences Act that you can literally bring to Parliament before to say repeal. These things do not need to be languishing. We need to have that comprehensive review of the Domestic Violence Act actually completed and something tabled in Parliament before the end of 2026. So I want to raise a challenge to our parliamentarians that we're happy that you are speaking. I see Senator Johnson-Smith on social media lamenting the issue of provocation being used in instances where gender-based violence may raise a concern. But we need to have these things actively discussed in Parliament, but moving beyond discussion to actual recommendations being made. That would be my challenge to our female parliamentarians. We need to hear more from you on this particular issue. Again, personally, I look to my leaders for leadership, and I was heartened when our first female finance minister spoke. But we need to see more action being taken in this respect. 2018, Jade, we had a Joint Select Committee report on the Sexual Offences Act that was tabled in Parliament. And every time we hear, unfortunately, of a heinous crime committed against a girl child, for example, we lament again about sentencing, and then we chastise the courts and so on. But we need to actually see our parliamentarians act if they think something needs to be acted upon. So again, challenge forward. We need to move with action on this issue. And to the public as well, we've heard of juries, for example, quick to let somebody go in certain parishes. We need to check our social consciousness. Too many people will say death penalty here, so but we don't want to serve for jury duty. Death penalty here, so but you may know of a family member who not too righted. Right? When I say righted here, I mean kind of more shaky. You hear the allegations that sexual touching may have occurred, but nobody no report the matter to the police for investigation. Raise our social consciousness, because these issues of domestic violence, sexual violence is for all of us to act and hold our parliamentarians accountable. I don't want to see nobody lamenting on social media. Lament in Parliament and make the actions happen there.
I have to fully agree with that, Mikel. I think we only have a minute left, so I'm just going to quickly say that our trivia answer was 2014. The question was, which year was our Disabilities Act first passed? It was 2014. It was put in place in 2022. The winner of the trivia was news commentator. So we will reach out with your prize. All right. So thank you all for joining us this week. I'm Jade Williams.
Yes, so this is not special treatment?
No, it is not special treatment. I have oversight of our producer.
All right, thank you so much. We will see you all next week. I'm happy to have your company. My name is Mikel Jackson, Executive Director.
I'm Jade Williams. See you next week.
justice for all. Justice under the law. Justice, Jamaica demand. Right to life, right to liberty. Out of many we are one in a Jamaica. Make it a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities. No to unlawful detention and police brutalization. Class, gender, race or religion. We not tolerate discrimination.
To join the fight against injustice, contact us at 755-4524 or JamaicансForJustice.org.
The people's champion.
Need help or want to report damage? Visit supportjamaica.gov.jm to find nearby aid, updates, and emergency support all in one place. The time by the Office of the Prime Minister is
2 minutes after 2.
This station raised me.